What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so we're wrapping up Blackest Night. We have like this one, and then there's another video today, and then we're done. And we're gonna be finished with our double uploads on Blackest Night. As much as I love it, I kind of want to return to just doing like Green Lantern videos once a week, because I think it gets a little weird, oversaturating with Green Lanterns. Too many Green Lantern videos drives everybody crazy. But anyway, so for those of you guys who are new, the long and short of this is that Blackest Night is basically the end times. It's this idea that these Black Lantern rings are just kind of risen out of nowhere, and the result is that they're bonding themselves to people who are both living and dead. Now, with those who are living, it's basically those who have died, and then they were supposed to move on to the afterlife, but they didn't. DC editorial decided to bring them back, but within the confines of DC's story itself, which is to say within the DC universe, it was this idea that the entity of death, Necron, had stepped in and kept those characters from dying. And so at this moment right now, there are two conflicts taking place. The first one is out in space involving the Green Lantern Corps, and the second is on Earth. And on Earth, it's largely just the superheroes that are there doing the best they can to stave off against this conflict. It's members of the Sinestro Corps, Green Lantern Corps, and so on and so forth. It's all the corps on Earth trying to stop the end of all things. Because remember, if the Black Lanterns basically bond rings to everybody, then the emotional spectrum will effectively cease to exist. All beings everywhere will feel no emotion whatsoever, and the result is that they will just sort of usher in this new era of darkness. The universe itself will effectively die. Now, what we covered up to this point was the idea that the superheroes were just trying to stave off this eventuality. They were trying to stave off the idea that everything was going to die. But in the middle of their attempts to stop the being Necron, they're suddenly met by the arrival of the Spectre. Now, the Spectre is a character that we haven't really talked about too often. We haven't really done a whole lot with him. When it came to the Spectre as a concept, he goes all the way back to like 1940. I mean, he's one of DC's oldest characters. He was created by Jerry Siegel, I think it was. And the whole idea was that the Spectre was designed to be really one of the earliest components of DC's whole mythological side, which is to say all their demons and angels and so on and so forth. But the Spectre is the living embodiment of basically God's vengeance, in the sense that there was a guy named Jim Corrigan. He was shot in the line of duty. Instead of dying, he basically became a host for the Spectre. And so the Spectre basically just travels around Earth in the DC landscape and finds those individuals who have been judged by God as basically being condemned to damnation, and then just whisks them away. And that's really about it. But the whole idea with the Spectre is that in the early days, he was crazy powerful. I mean, he was almost reality warping, godly powerful. Now, in Crisis on Infinite Earths, going forward, after the mid-1980s, DC depowered him quite a bit. But the whole idea was that the Jim Corrigan and Spectre dichotomy reigned supreme for quite some time, but different writers did different things with the characters. But the whole idea was that in the post-crisis landscape, DC actually killed off the character of Jim Corrigan. The whole idea here is that following the death of Jim Corrigan, there was a story called Day of Judgment, and even then there were some, stories that took place in between there, where it was basically the question of what is DC going to do with the character of the Spectre? What are they going to do with the character of Hal Jordan? Remember, in 1993, Hal Jordan basically became Parallax, and we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But the idea was that, Hal Jordan basically became this corruptible guy, and DC was removing him to replace him with Kyle Rayner. And so it made sense to basically merge, Hal Jordan and the Spectre together, which is where all that stuff happened. But the whole idea was that there was a sort of bouncing around that took place with the Spectre concept. Now, in terms of how it exists now, Hal Jordan and the Spectre split from one another. It presented itself as the same scenario. What do they do with the Spectre if he doesn't have a host? And so what this did is it introduced a character by the name of Crispin Allen. And the whole idea was that Crispin Allen was basically this guy who was a partner of the character of Renee Montoya. Crispin Allen is basically the new host for the Spectre. And it's one of those interesting scenarios, because what this does is it actually leads us into the concept of Parallax. Because the Spectre is designed to be the living embodiment of God's vengeance, and because the Spectre, while he is weaker than he's historically been, is still an incredibly powerful being, what this means is that none of the heroes on Earth can actually stop the Spectre. Now, in terms of the fact that Crispin Allen was killed and then became a host for the Spectre, this meant that Crispin Allen could actually become a Black Lantern. And that's what we saw over the course of the Blackest Night story, is we basically saw a ring bond itself to Crispin Allen. And so what we learned over the course of Blackest Night is that instead of the Black Lantern rings actually resurrecting the dead, instead what they were doing is they were bonding themselves to the corpses of those who died and then basically duplicating them. And so in this instance, this Black Lantern Spectre is not actually the Spectre. Instead, it's the ring creating an image of the Spectre. And the way that we know that is because of the fact that with Hal Jordan basically sitting down and saying, we cannot defeat the Spectre on our own because of the sheer power that he has, he says the only way to do this is to bring back an entity that I've never wanted to bring back again. What he does is he brings back Parallax. But the whole idea was that in the early 1990s, because Hal Jordan as a Green Lantern was largely just not popular with readers, DC decided to kill him off and replace him with more of a younger, vibrant version of the Green Lantern concept. DC launched a story called Emerald Twilight, and Emerald Twilight basically dealt with the idea that Hal Jordan had returned to Earth after the events of the death of Superman, only to find out that cyborg Superman had obliterated the entirety of Coast City alongside the villain Mongol. The result was that Hal Jordan used his ring to basically recreate Coast City. He was chastised for it, he went absolutely nuts, and then he in turn wiped out the entirety of the Green Lantern Corps, absorbed the energy of the Central Power Battery, which is where the Green Lanterns get their power from, and then killed almost all the Guardians except for Ganthet, and then absorbed all their energies into himself and just started calling himself Parallax. When writer Geoff Johns took over the Green Lantern story, what he did is he modified the original Emerald Twilight story. What he established is he said, okay, historically the Green Lanterns have always been weak to the color yellow. What he did is he came back and he said what actually happened is somewhere along the line, the living embodiment of fear in the DC universe, known as a Parallax, had been captured by the Guardians of the Universe and confined within the Green Lantern Central Power Battery. And what this did is it allowed Parallax to basically contaminate the Green Lantern energy, which is what made them weak to the color yellow. And so what this meant was that during the events of Emerald Twilight, when Hal Jordan came home and his city was destroyed and so on and so forth, it basically put him in a weak state of mind. And working alongside Parallax, Sinestro devised this plan to allow the Parallax entity to possess Hal Jordan. And that's what happened. That's the new updated origin of the Hal Jordan Parallax concept. Now, the reason why this ties into the whole concept of the Spectre is because when the events of Emerald Twilight ended and Hal Jordan was no longer the character of Parallax, Kyle Rayner was already the Green Lantern. And so DC did not want to bring Hal Jordan back, because if they did, what it meant is they would have had two characters vying for the position of Green Lantern, and new fans who liked Kyle Rayner didn't want to see Hal Jordan return. And so what they did is they launched the Day of Judgment story, which saw Hal Jordan and Spectre merging into a singular being. And it stayed that way until Green Lantern Rebirth, and then split Hal Jordan and Spectre again. And so that's why all that stuff sort of ties in together, and that's why all this is kind of important. But at this moment right now, when Hal Jordan basically goes back to being Parallax, when he returns to being a host for the Parallax entity, he's not as powerful as he was. But the goal of him returning to the role of Parallax is not for the purpose of destroying the Spectre, it's for the purpose of bringing the Spectre out. When Hal Jordan as Parallax begins fighting the Spectre and essentially tears him open, what we end up finding is that within this Black Lantern shell is the actual Spectre himself alongside Crispus Allen. And so they're basically being held captive, and their power is being channeled and used by the Black Lantern ring. Now, following this defeat of Black Lantern Spectre, what ends up happening is it's basically just Hal Jordan being split in half again. Because Hal Jordan is still in there, he has an emotional tie to Carol Ferris. Carol Ferris was the love interest of Hal Jordan for years and years and years and years. And so because of this, it's basically this idea that the Spectre can seize hold of Parallax and pull the entity out of Hal Jordan, but only if somebody is pulling the other direction. And that's why that works, is because it's basically Carol Ferris who grabs onto the Hal Jordan concept and pulls on him while the Parallax entity is being pulled out, and it means that Hal Jordan goes back to his normal self. The other half of this is actually the actions of Atrocitus of the Red Lanterns. But one of the things that Geoff Johns hits on here is the idea of the Red Lantern entity. And so what this is going to do is lead into all these different entities. Now, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But for right now, what this also hits at is the idea that no one can really escape the might of a lantern ring, so long as a being is sentient. If a ring can bond to them, they can become part of that core. And in this instance, what Atrocitus actually tries to do is bond the Spectre to the Red Lantern ring. But it doesn't last. It lasts maybe for like a panel or two. And the reason for this is because when a Red Lantern ring takes over a host, a certain amount of time has to pass before that person is completely converted into a Red Lantern. But in this instance, because the Spectre's so powerful, he doesn't fall prey, his heart's not replaced or anything along those lines. But the reason why Atrocitus did this is because Atrocitus has actually believed that the Spectre is basically the Red Lantern entity that Atrocitus has been looking for, the Red Lantern equivalent to like Parallax. And so because of this, the Spectre simply responds by saying, you can't make me into a Red Lantern, but I've met the entity that you're looking for, and if you find it, it will kill you. It's the this idea that Geoff Johns is setting the stage for this huge, expansive revelation of all these different things that will come later on down the line with regards to all these different cores. Now, with regards to the Spectre himself, what he ends up doing is actually try to take out Necron, but this is a major limitation of the Spectre. While the Spectre used to be this godly, powerful being back in the 40s and the 50s and 60s and 70s, nowadays, he's basically just a guy that shows up and just whisks the souls of the damned off, and that's it. That's really all there is to it. In this instance, Necron does not have a soul. And so in this instance, because of the fact that Necron does not actually have a soul for the Spectre to take, the Spectre is basically powerless against him. Not only this, Necron actually whisks the Spectre away. What it means is the right hand of God cannot stop Necron. Now, if the presence chose to step in, sure, like that would be the end of it and Necron would be defeated. But, in this circumstance, the story needs to be told. So aside from pulling in, one of those caveats, that's really about it. Things wrap up pretty fast. Now, with regards to the whole idea of Guy Gardner and the Green Lantern Corps, one of the things that we had talked about in the last video was that the Green Lantern Corps itself, at least what was left of the number, due to the fact that so many of them were being killed by Black Lanterns and then being converted into Black Lanterns themselves, Kyle Rayner, one of the more popular Green Lanterns, was believed to have been killed. And in his rage, Guy Gardner had lost his mind and then was bonded with a Red Lantern ring. And what we're seeing right now is this transitionary period where Guy Gardner is basically at a point where if the ring is pulled off, he will essentially die. The various Green Lanterns are basically trying to find a way to bring Guy Gardner down and then basically cure him. Because remember, when a person becomes a Red Lantern, they're just mindless rage. And so the Green Lantern planet Mogo is actually able to offer some measure of a reprieve. And it's really cool the way this happens. What Mogo basically does is force Guy Gardner to basically have this inner fight with himself, which is to say the Green Lantern part of himself that recalls all the great memories and the love interests he's had and different things like that, and the Red Lantern part of himself that really just kind of feeds on all the horrible experiences that he's had. The idea here is to actually offer some measure of a distraction to allow the Green Lanterns to muster their number and then subdue Guy Gardner. And so what this does is it allows Mogo the planet to actually pull Guy Gardner down inside of him and then begin releasing all these different leeches. Now, this is the second way in which a person can be cured when it comes to Red Lantern rage. In truth, while this does purge a lot of the Red Lantern energy out of them, one of the things that's immediately made clear is that Guy Gardner is not completely cured of the Red Lantern energy. If his ring was removed, he would die. And so the only way to really bring him back, the only way to restore some measure of normalcy is to bring him to a Blue Lantern, because Blue Lanterns are the ones that basically go through this sort of cleansing process, and they're the only way in which a person who is a Red Lantern can safely have their ring removed and then go back to being part of whatever Corps they were before. So again, this basically brings the Green Lantern Corps directly to Earth, where this final battle will take place. And so again, transitioning back to Earth proper, while all these different heroes are basically trying to defeat Necron, at the end of the day, they're not able to defeat a being of such intense power. The arrival of Guy Gardner and the other Green Lanterns, the fact that the Blue Lanterns are here, all the different corps have united under the idea of trying to defeat Necron, but none of them can do it because he's just such an astronomically powerful being. Not only that, we end up getting an explanation as to why it was that Necron stepped in the way and kept all these different superheroes from dying over the course of their lives. The reason for this is because Necron has been seeking something out, and the only way he can attain it is to actually kill one of the Guardians of the Universe and then use their blood in a ritual of sorts, and then in turn wake up something called the Life Entity. And so when it comes to the Life Entity itself, it's essentially this idea that this is kind of a representation of where life originated. And that's one of the big revelations that comes out of this, is because it was believed that the Guardians of the Universe, the Maltusians, were the first race in the universe. But what this reveals to us is life did not start with the Maltusians, it started on Earth. The Maltusians covered that up. They basically took the Life Entity, buried it in the core of the Earth, and then wrote it out of history in order to, one, ensure that people would believe that they were the original source of life in the universe, the first race to pop up, and two, to maintain their power and to protect the Life Entity, to keep an event like this from actually happening. It is designed to show the Guardians of the Universe as beings who are full of hubris, who believed that they legitimately have the right to decide how the universe should progress. And so it basically would have brought the entire foundation of what it is that made the Guardians of the Universe as they are crashing down around them, and people would have just lost trust in them entirely, not to mention the Green Lantern Corps probably would have vacated. But more so than that, the Life Entity is the representation of life in the DC universe, and if somebody harnesses that power, they would become God. And that's the fear that the Guardians of the Universe have, that if people knew the Life Entity entity exists, it would be like this great gold rush for the power of the life entity. It could potentially even usher in this massive universal civil war of people who were coveting all this power, and whoever came out on top, no matter what their intentions were, they would be virtually unstoppable. And so in this instance, where Hal Jordan rationalizes and says, okay, well, we have to seize the power of the life entity in order to basically destroy Necron and the Black Lantern Corps, Thal Sinestro steps in. And Thal Sinestro says, no, you had Parallax, I get the life entity. And so what we end up having here is basically the rise of the first White Lantern in the form of Thal Sinestro, who seizes the power of the life entity itself. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.